all in a day's work, celebrating the role of labor in building a great nation. Meet the Piano Man. Even the Vatican wants his creations. Labor of love. Workers create the altar for the papal mass at the National Shrine. And the work of his hands. A New Jersey sculptor handcrafts a gift for a special visitor. Those stories and more on this Labor Day, Monday, September 7th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with our special Labor Day edition of EWTN News Nightly. The first Labor Day holiday was celebrated in 1882, a creation of the labor movement. It's traditionally celebrated on the first Monday in September. Labor Day is dedicated to social and economic achievements of workers. It is a tribute to the strength, prosperity, and the well-being of our nation. The labor movement itself dates back to the founding of America. As Wyatt Goolsby reports, you don't have to go far to find a little bit of history near you.
From statues to murals to stained glass windows, across America you'll find thousands of landmarks recognizing the history of labor. Even today, historians are still sifting through many found in major metropolitan areas.
There is no social justice movement on earth that hasn't had its own creative expressions that help move it forward. I mean, you can talk all you want, but the arts move people's hearts.
Elise Bryant promotes the history of American workers through the arts in her work at the Labor Heritage Foundation. The group lists key landmarks in D.C., including 3 stained glass windows inside the National Cathedral. Many are dedicated to important figures in the labor movement, including Samuel Gompers, William Green, and Philip Murray.
One of the landmarks with the most visual impact is located here inside the Department of Labor in Washington. I'm standing next to several murals that represent different centuries in American labor history. They were first created in 1977, but they were recently restored. And the closer you take a look at some of these, the more detail you'll find.
They don't represent, labor leaders or business leaders, and they glorify work in a really unique way. They take a moment of time, just a moment of people at work, and you're brought into that in a really extraordinary way.
For Catholics, cultural landmarks like these represent more than just history. Connie Cordovilla with the American Federation of Teachers says landmarks like the murals remind her of the Church's teaching on the dignity of the worker. She cites Pope Leo XIII, who challenged Catholics to stand up for the respect of the person, no matter what their job might be.
And again, reinforce the fact that social justice is the point of work and labor, and people need to have the right to own property. They need to have the right to be able to work in a place where they can exercise their voice.
A voice heard from the 17th to the 21st century. In Washington, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Wyatt. And Pope Francis often speaks about the dignity of work and workers. In fact, the Catholic Church has long been vocal on this topic. As Wyatt mentioned, in 1891, Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum was released. We recently discussed it with church historian Dr. Matthew Bunson from Catholic Distance University.
Well, the church was grappling, as the rest of society was, with the impact, the shattering impact of the Industrial Revolution that had started in England around 1760 and then had spread to Europe. The result was, of course, that you had millions of men, women, and children in Europe and then across the United States working in factories, living in really terrible conditions. You had cholera outbreaks. You had very few workers' rights. You had wages that were completely at the whim of the employer. Everything was thoroughly unregulated. And then you had the possession of capital in a tiny number of hands. So the church was looking at all of these social problems and trying to figure out what can we do as a church to deal with them, to help the families especially cope with these problems.
So the whole world had basically changed into an industrial world, which created a whole new dynamic between employer and employee.
Yes.
What did Leo say about socialism and capitalism and the government role in the working world?
Right. At the very early portion of Rerum Novarum in 1891, when he released his encyclical, he made the point that there had been a chasm that had grown between those who possessed capital, those who possessed the money, and those who worked for them. And he was really worried about the social impacts of that, especially because workers were gravitating, and many of the intellectual classes were gravitating toward the idea of socialism, that the state should own all property and dole out possessions, and the state should have really say in every aspect of life. On the other side, you had the capitalists who were very leery of socialism. They wanted to maximize their profits. What Leo was proposing was something in between. What he wanted was to refute all of the false claims of socialism. In fact, he devotes a third of his encyclical to destroying the arguments of the socialists, but at the same time reminding the capitalists and the workers that they have to work together, that they have to have an alliance, a friendship, a collaboration together. As he wrote very famously in Rerum Novarum, you cannot have labor without capital and capital without labor.
Aren't we hearing many of these points echoed right now by Pope Francis?
Yes, yes, and this is the genius of Catholic social thought, especially as laid out by Pope Leo XIII. The very issues that Leo was grappling with, the Church was contending with and trying to bring into the fore with the gospel of charity and justice, we're dealing with now, not just in the limited confines of Europe, but across the entire world because of globalization, mass industrialization, and the impact of technology. We're hearing, for example, today of the workers under threat because of robotics, literally wiping out factories that we will no longer need workers for. Francis is seeing this, but he's building, for example, in his encyclical Laudato Si, on that legacy of the popes, as every pope since Leo XIII has done in that same beautiful tradition.
Some people see him as anti-capitalism. In fact, some have actually called him a communist.
Yes.
Where do you think he fits in that?
He fits perfectly in the Catholic social teaching tradition.
Yes.
He is very clear in his refutation of communism, exactly as Leo XIII was. And we have to remember that Leo XIII was dealing with the first rise of communism. The writings of Marx were first sort of gaining currency and fashion. Francis stands, though, also very clearly in Catholic social thought in promoting authentic charity and justice. And at the heart of it is always the dignity of the human person and the dignity of the family. That runs through the whole of Rerum Novarum, and that's something that has been followed by popes ever since.
So really, the bottom line is that work is for the human person, not the other way around.
Yes, that you cannot put money and profit at the heart of your economic system. You must put the human person. Rerum Novarum taught us that the dignity of the human person has to be perpetuated, protected, and nurtured in every economic setting, especially in the face of industrialization, sweeping social change, sweeping economic change. It's the lesson that the popes have been talking about, as I said, since. We can go back to the beautiful writings of Pope St. John Paul II, Centesimus Annus, Sollicitudo Rei Socialis, into Benedict XVI's pontificate with the Caritas in Veritate, and now into Francis's, where we can't have that gulf between those who possess the wealth and the workers. We all have to work together, again, as the Church teaches, in charity and justice.
Timeless teaching and very pertinent on this Labor Day 2015. Dr. Matthew Bunson, thank you.
Great to be with you.
And the roles of workers in the U.S. vary greatly, from the mail carrier to the piano man. For more than 100 years, names like Steinway and Baldwin dominated the piano industry. Now, an independent piano man gains recognition for his work even at the Vatican. As Mark Irons reports tonight, he seems to be hitting all the right keys.
He's a self-proclaimed child prodigy who became a professional drummer. But Warren Shadd grew up around pianos.
My father was a piano technician, rebuilder, restorer of pianos. So I used to see all the pianos in the house, in the basement, in the warehouse, and I would just toy with them, build them like model cars.
Since 2002, Shadd has been making a name for himself, not as a performer, but as a piano maker.
One thing about the pianos here, they're very aesthetically pleasing.
From the ornate look to design features and tone, the sounds of Shadd are being heard.
These pianos, though, they're going all over the world.
Yeah, from New York to Australia.
Even the Vatican wants one of his pianos.
And the thing about it is it's replacing a brand that has been there for generations, over and over again. And so for us to come in as the little guys to replace the big guys, you know, is great. You know?
Warren is a pioneer in his field.
You're the only African-American manufacturer of pianos.
That's what they say.
Is that a fact?
That is a fact, actually. That is a fact. and some would even say de facto musical instrument.
The instrument he's most proud of? This interactive piano. It can assist deaf, blind, and autistic pianists.
This is my greatest accomplishment so far.
Performer, designer, innovator, all packed in one name.
Do you also offer lessons?
In Maryland, Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Mark. Great story. We expect to hear music from musicians, but not from servers at a restaurant. Catherine Zeltner introduces us to a woman whose labor of love is taking gospel music from the church to the table.
When you place your order at DC's first IHOP,
egg scrambled, no cheese, hash browns, and 2 buttermilk pancakes, 2 coffees, and 2 ice waters.
Rose Lennon may serve up a surprise.
I wanna be where you are. I've gotta be where you are.
The IHOP waitress often breaks into gospel singing throughout her shift. She says the restaurant acoustics are like a recording studio's, and music is her ministry.
When did you first decide you're gonna sing to customers here?
Sometimes even when I feel like I might have a bad day or I'm not worthy of singing his praise, but you know what? He was like, the more you praise me, the more I bless you.
Regulars like Pastor Payne say this IHOP sometimes feels more like church than a breakfast chain.
She clearly has a gift of God, and just boom, like that. You were not prepared for it.
Rose Lennon doesn't perform on demand, only when she feels called to the customer.
At the time, the Spirit said, bless him with this. And I would just sing.
And she doesn't worry about offending diners, because even though she's auditioned for American Idol and The Voice, Lennon believes God made IHOP her stage.
He was molding me and developing me to be who he wanted me to be in Christ and in this ministry. And that was just to sing and song and sing to the people and bless them with this gift that he's given me.
So if you're seated in Rose's section, prepare yourself for praise with a side of pancakes.
I'm like, wow, like God is really working in here because it's not me.
Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Yes, ma'am.
Coming up, we show you the intricate work going into the altar for the Pope's Mass in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick with our special Labor Day edition of EWTN News Nightly. After the Labor Day holiday, September brings the first visit of Pope Francis to the United States. About 25,000 people are expected at the canonization Mass for Blessed Junipero Serra here in D.C. The Holy Father celebrates the Mass outside the National Shrine September 23rd. Jason Calvi has been following the labor involved in the final preparations. Here's part 1 of Jason's series.
Journalists come out of the woodwork to capture furniture fit for a pope.
The back of the papal chair.
These are the ordinary tools of the carpenter, but this project is heavenly.
To be able to go ahead and make an altar for the sacrifice of the Mass is the highlight of my life. To do it for the Holy Father is, it's over the top.
A repeat experience for Deacon Dave Calhoun and his St. Joseph's carpentry shop. They crafted the altar and chair for Pope Benedict's 2008 trip to D.C. Now they're making the altar and other items for Pope Francis.
It means a lot to me, to my entire family, and for any immigrant who comes to this country hoping for a new life and to have a profession. It's a very beautiful profession.
Doug Fouth's cabinet company is creating the chairs.
It's like going to the World Series.
Doug is looking to the foster father of Jesus for inspiration for his daily work.
Joseph was a carpenter, and he did it every day. He didn't necessarily do a Pope's chair, but he was making furniture, and so that's just how I treat it, how I work it.
It's not just our first look at the altar Pope Francis will use when he celebrates Mass in D.C., but it's the first chance Catholic University students who designed it are checking this out.
Oh my gosh, it's so awesome to see the altar.
These 3 CUA students came up with the winning design. but they didn't choose all the materials.
You know what they're using, the silk of the chair? No. What they're getting?
They're using bridal,
stuff like wedding gown material. Yeah.
A fitting touch for the Mass, also called the Wedding Feast of the Lamb. In Maryland, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
And in part 2 of his exclusive report, Jason now takes us behind the scenes in the making of the altar's marvelous marble top.
The story of the Pope's altar begins here in Virginia.
Obviously, I've been to thousands of masses, but to be at the Pope's Mass and to have had a hand in making something that he will touch is very, very meaningful.
Pope Francis will celebrate Mass on the 8-foot-long slab, which will be placed on top of this wooden base.
There are very few people who can say they've made something for him, and I'm one of those people.
Julio Marquez and his colleagues are busy working on the marble top. It'll become the main altar inside the National Shrine after the Pope's Mass.
Here at Rugo, they have a library of stones. This is limestone from Alabama, and right here, this is from Botticino, Italy, and this is what the Pope's altar is going to be made of.
I think the quarrying of this material goes back to the Middle Ages. It's extremely popular in Catholic churches throughout Italy.
The same stone is used at the National Shrine. Rugo Stone is also working on a small slab of this Tennessee marble. It will go inside Knoxville's new cathedral. Pope Francis will bless it in New York. But first, this Argentine craftsman needs to cut it.
He's one of the important persons in the world. So it's, I don't know, I feel excited, you know.
In Virginia, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, Alan Holdren goes one-on-one with the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. And check out a handcrafted crozier fit for a pope. We're grateful you can join us this Monday evening, September 7th, for our Labor Day special edition of EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. On Labor Day, we honor all who work, especially those whose work is unseen and often unappreciated. New York's Robin Nagel is just one example. Another man's trash is Robin Nagel's treasure.
How many honks so far?
Nagel is the New York Sanitation Department's very own anthropologist in residence.
Heavy.
A garbage guru who studies the refuse of the nation's largest city.
I'm going to push it all right back out.
She says the trash says a lot about the 8.5 million New Yorkers. Primarily, we've become a throwaway culture with little thought about the consequences.
We also, therefore, are creating a kind of waste stream that will probably outlive even our children's children, because plastic in particular, it's such a new product, such a new chemistry in human history. We don't know its half-life.
Nagel's position at the Sanitation Department is honorary.
Yes, sir.
She's actually a professor at New York University.
It just shows what it looked like on the job back in 1903.
But she has been willing to roll up her sleeves, working as a garbage collector on the street for nearly a year.
I will also make clear to you how it is far more dangerous than being a cop or a firefighter. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you are three times more likely to be injured or killed in the line of duty.
Nagel says the amount of garbage per person is going up, but the trash has gotten lighter as manufacturers move away from wood and glass materials. Her research has led to a book on her findings. She also gives presentations to new hires on the history of the department, helping to instill pride in their work.
If we don't come, we don't pick up the garbage off the streets, if we don't take care of the snow, nobody can move and everybody will be stuck. So I do feel like it first starts with us, and then when we do our job, I feel everybody else can do their job.
And the job at hand for these sanitation workers, removing 3.5 million tons of garbage produced in the city each year. It's hard work and much appreciated. Well, we're now just 15 days away from the arrival of Pope Francis here in Washington, D.C. Rome correspondent Alan Holdren recently talked one-on-one with Ken Hackett, the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. They discussed the Pope's decision to come to the U.S. by way of Cuba.
One of the greatest international diplomatic developments of the last year involved Vatican diplomacy. This is the normalization, or this process of normalizing relations between the U.S. and Cuba. How have you been involved in this process?
I have been very happily watching on the sidelines, cheering them on. It has been a major breakthrough, something that many of us applauded, even as President Obama mentioned changing the policy towards Cuba early on in his tenure. So when the opportunity presented itself, the church became involved. I mean, you can only but applaud.
The Pope will be visiting both of these nations next month. He'll actually be entering the United States from Cuba. What does that gesture, what message does that send to the world?
Pope Francis said early on that if he did come to the United States, he would love to enter from the south. The choice of going to Cuba followed his choice of first going to Philadelphia for the World Meeting on Families. Next decision was a response to President Obama's invitation to come to Washington. And thirdly, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's invitation to speak at the UN. And then along came the change in relationships between the US and Cuba, and the invitation from Raul Castro to the Holy Father to come to Cuba. So it followed in a sequence. Significance, oh, kind of, but I wouldn't read a terrible amount into it, except in a positive way.
And the Pope will be addressing the U.S. Congress while he's there in Washington, D.C. He's expected to speak on economic policy, on immigration and religious freedom. Of all of these things, and in all of these things, do you expect him to grill the American people?
No, I don't see Francis grilling or calling out congresspersons on these issues. Rather, I think he will speak to Congress and to the American people and to the world through that venue about issues of fundamental concern, raising up the values that make our nation great, of compassion and concern for the poor, opportunity, liberties. I think he will raise all of those issues rather than scolding anybody. I don't think he's prepared to do that. There are a range of issues that he has already spoken on which are relevant in the United States, and you mentioned some of them: migration, concern for the poor, America's role in the world and what it can be. So I think he'll raise many of those.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Alan. And as we anticipate the papal visit, now just a couple of weeks away, a New Jersey sculptor is even closer to completing a unique work of art he'd like to present to the Holy Father. He spent hours handcrafting a crozier, or staff, inspired by the upcoming World Meeting of Families. Wyatt Goolsby has his story.
If you listen carefully near this tranquil home in South Jersey, you may be able to make out the sound of carving. In the backyard, you'll find Frank Cedar in his workshop. The 65-year-old is hard at work on a gift for Pope Francis. He spent more than 100 hours on this crozier he's calling the Staff of the Good Shepherd.
Now, Frank has been thinking about this crozier for a little bit over a year now. He's played with several different designs, and he had the final one up here on the wall. We have a logo of the World Meeting of Families, the Holy Family itself, at the top of the crozier. Right underneath that, you have the chalice with the Eucharist, and underneath that are 3 lilies, which represents the Trinity. And throughout the crozier, there are vines. He says that represents us, the people, who cling to our shepherd.
As a nod to the Pope's roots, the main part of the staff is purple wood, imported from South America. He will also use olive wood from Italy and maple wood from America.
Christ is depicted with the staff many times as our Good Shepherd.
Frank and his family are devout Catholics. Over the decades, he's created gifts for Pope Benedict and presented a sculpture to Pope John Paul II.
Gives you an incredible feeling. It was very rewarding, spiritually.
Frank will be the first to tell you he's not looking for personal recognition or money, and there's no guarantee the Pope will receive the gift when he comes to the U.S. in September. But he says if local children have the chance to present it, that would be his dream.
I think it was done out of a work of worship or an act of worship, but if it gets into the hands of Pope Francis, his reaction, if he knew everything, I would think that he would be very pleased.
And so Frank continues to carve in his backyard, as he sees it, a way of talking to the Lord every day. In New Jersey, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks for joining us on this Labor Day. Good night and God bless you.